All right, now where the best has been saved for last. Good afternoon, good late afternoon. I'm Carolyn Sapansky. I'm the immediate past president of the TEC. I represent Copus of Dallas and Desk and Derrick. It is my distinct pleasure to introduce you to the final moderator for today's wonderful event, and I hope you've all enjoyed it. It's Dr. Bernard Weinstein. Dr. Weinstein is the Associate Director of the McGuire Energy Institute and an adjunct professor of business economics in the Cox School of Business at SMU. From 1989 to 2009, he was the director of the Center for Economic Development and Research at UNT. Dr. Weinstein studied public administration at Dartmouth and graduated in 1963. After a year of study at the London School of Economics and Political Science, he began a graduate work in economics at Columbia, where he received his PhD in 1973. He has since been an instructor at various universities and has worked for several U.S. government agencies, including the President's Commission of School Finance, the IRS, and the Federal Trade Commission. Dr. Weinstein is a prolific author of books, monographs, and articles on the subject of economic development, energy security, public policy, and taxation. You can find his works in many professional magazines and major city newspapers. He is also a regular contributor to the National Journal's Energy and Environmental blog and The Hill. Dr. Weinstein has been a consultant in many companies, nonprofit organizations, and government agencies, and he testifies frequently before the legislative, regulatory, and judicial branches. Dr. Weinstein is currently a panelist with the Western Blue Chip Economic Forecast and is a member of the Dallas-Fort Worth Association for Business Economics and serves on the boards of directors of several banks. Since 2012, he has been an associate of the John Goodwin Tower Center for Political Studies at SMU and a fellow with the George W. Bush Institute. Please help me in welcoming Dr. Bernard Weinstein, whose book you got earlier. Ask him for an autograph.
Thank you, but I'm not the important person up here today. We have four distinguished panelists, and I want to get to them in just a second. The theme of this final panel is connecting Texas wells to the world. This is the last panel of the day, and just about everything's probably already been covered. So some of this we may be going over a second or a third time. But let me just summarize a couple of facts before we get into our discussion. So domestic production of oil has been skyrocketing. Here in Texas, it's up 100% just in the past 6 years. But at the same time, consumption of oil in the U.S. is falling. And that's occurring mainly because we're using a lot less gasoline, and projections from the Department of Energy show that gasoline use is likely to continue declining for the foreseeable future has become more efficient in our use of gasoline. And we move to even higher fuel economy standards. At the same time, today we're looking at very low natural gas prices. And because gas prices have been so low for so long, that has discouraged new drilling for dry gas. And we know that most of the rigs have left the Barnett and moved to the Eagle Ford, which is more of an oil and liquids play. We also know that huge amounts of associated gas are being flared in the Eagle Ford and in the Bakken. On the political front, we're hearing a lot of discussion about exporting natural gas, exporting oil. We do have 6 terminals approved, 2 under construction. There are another 10 or 20 permits pending. Against the backdrop of the Ukrainian crisis, we're hearing some politicians talk about, well, let's expedite the approval of all these LNG export permits, and that'll help the Ukraine. Of course, it would be at least a decade before we started exporting sizable amounts of LNG. In any case, but what's significant, I think, is that we do hear a lot of discussion about energy exports and even crude oil exports. 6 months ago, nobody was talking about it. Now everybody's talking about crude oil exports. That's the major theme at the CERA conference this year, which is going on in Houston right now. But at the same time, we're talking a lot more about exporting gas and exporting oil. There's also been a lot of pushback. Pushback both from environmentalists and in some cases from industries who have a vested interest in maintaining the status quo. And we did hear earlier about the Secretary of Energy Moniz comments at the CERA this week about the oil exports and how the case hasn't been made. Secretary Moniz also said a couple of weeks ago that the DOE is going to move very slowly and very deliberately in terms of approving additional permits for LNG exports. And then talking of pushback, we're also getting pushback from environmentalists and others against fracking. I mean, we don't see it so much in the state of Texas, but the anti-fracking movement is gaining a lot of steam. At the same time, we've got the Environmental Protection Agency champing at the bit to get into the business of overseeing hydraulic fracturing. So, against this backdrop, how do we ensure that Texas's wells, and for that matter, the rest of America's wells, are connected to the world, are connected to the global market? And I'm going to ask Chancellor HANCE to answer that question for us. Kent HANCE is currently Chancellor of the Texas Tech University, the Texas Tech University Health Science Center. Prior to that, he was a partner in HANCE Scarborough, an Austin law firm. Prior to that, let's go way, way back, he began his career in politics in 1974. He won a seat in the Texas State Senate. 4 years later, he was elected to the U.S. Congress from the 19th Congressional District. And after he got tired of that, he decided to become chairman of the Texas Railroad Commission. So Kent HANCE has lived through the good, the bad, and the ugly. He's seen the boom, he's seen the bust, he's seen this new era of energy abundance. So seriously, against all the good and all the pushback that we're seeing, what's the best approach? What can we do? We the people, we the public, we the folks who are trying to influence policy to ensure that Texas wells are connected to the rest of the world.
Thank you, Bud. When I was chairman of the Railroad Commission, I had the distinct ability to land in that position at a time that oil went to $9 a barrel. And I remember going to Midland, and there was a bumper sticker that said, "I can hear her warming up," because the old saying, the opera's not over till the fat lady sings. They could hear her warming up in Midland. It was a tough time. Right now, in this day and time, I want to touch on just a couple of things that we are working on educationally. We just opened at Texas Tech our petroleum engineering building, a brand new building, 42,000 square feet, state of the art. It's great. If you are on the northern edge of the Permian Basin and you can't raise the money to build a new petroleum engineering building now, you'll never raise the money. And so we were fortunate at the right place at the right time, and we didn't have to have any state money, and we built it quickly. We're in the process of turning out a lot of engineers. We have 600 kids in petroleum engineering right now. And in our business school, we have 300 getting a degree in landing operation. And so we're trying to keep up with the boom that's going on. But if you look at all that's happening, we have started a group of scientists and others that are working on fracking. What are the downsides? What are the upsides? What are the scientific answers? The biggest problem you face in bureaucracy is a lot of people do not want to let science be the determining factor. And if science is a determining factor, you're going to be better off, because if you're making a mistake, you can adjust with that mistake. And so the most important thing I think that we can do as an educational institution is make sure that we're involved in making the right decisions with science. That it's based on facts. It's not based on emotion or on certain environmental thought process that is more of a religion than it is a science. And I think that's very important. One other quick thing is that with the talk on exports of LNG, you know, that's the big problem. You just summed it up, Bud. You've gotten a few that have been approved. You've got a little over 20 that are in the process. But the process of getting approved is very slow. And they just tell you from the word go, it is slow. We would have lost World War II if we'd had the EPA and the permits. The big inch would have still been at Texarkana trying to get a permit. It would have gotten completely past us. I'm one that wants to protect the environment, but I think that you have to use good judgment and you have to say, how do we solve this problem? And there are a lot of people in the bureaucracy that want to determine how do we cause this problem? How do we think? What happens if a bald eagle flies over someone in Battle Creek, Michigan on the 5th Tuesday of July and there's an accident? Well, you know, I don't know. But I do know that there are people in different parts of the world that need our LNG and that it's a great export for us. We do have manufacturers that have a different opinion. They want to keep the price as low as possible so they can, in their opinion, bring more jobs home. But part of what we're doing is trying to make sure we have the best people available. And that's not just Texas Tech. I work with the people at A&M, Oklahoma, Tulsa, Oklahoma State University of Texas, and we're all trying to turn them out. And I will say this, if you talk to a youngster coming into school and you talk to them about petroleum engineering, they're very eager. You don't have to talk to them very long. They'll switch from mechanical engineering to petroleum engineering. You just got to give them a few facts.
Yeah, we heard several other panels today about the critical need for trained people. Indeed, the one thing that could kind of derail this energy revolution is not having enough folks in the pipeline and getting the training in the right fields to allow this to continue. So human capital is obviously very, very critical if we're going to continue to connect Texas wells and the rest of America's wells to the world. Before I get into specific questions, did either of you want to comment on kind of this big picture question that I threw out?
I just have one quick comment, Bud, about the fracturing, and that is, it's, you know, a frac job is a slang term for fracture. Mm-hmm. And I'm not the best speller in the room, but there is no K in frac. And it just drives me crazy that even in some cases our own Association of the Press spell frac with a K. And certainly the adversaries to fracking spell it with a K to make it sound worse than it really is. And so that just bugs me. I just want to say it.
And that pearl of wisdom came from BYRON Dunn, who is the CEO and founding partner of Tubular Synergy Group. And we'll hear more from BYRON in a minute. Either you guys want to?
I have something to say. So when we talk about LNG, and everyone talks about large-scale exports, when we talk about LNG at HACO Energy Group, we're talking about small scale. And so we're not waiting for FERC approval to start producing LNG and starting to build a market. We're using that LNG and we're pouring it back into the energy sector, using it in drilling rigs and frac units to displace diesel. So, you know, we don't have to wait for these large-scale LNG projects. We burn a lot of energy to find and extract energy, so let's start using that. And we're putting the first LNG facility dedicated to the energy sector down in South Texas to serve the Eagle Ford. So that's another way that we can start to build this demand.
Well, in fact, this is Chris Coleman, who's the president of HACO LNG. I was going to ask you to talk about your project in South Texas. So you want to talk some more about it?
Sure. That's what I'm here for.
Okay.
Yeah, so, you know, our focus, and I think, you know, if you talk about the common themes, HACO Energy Group is an independent oil and gas company. We've got acreage in New Mexico, on the Permian side there. We've got a large unconventional acreage position over in Spain. And then we have this LNG project. The common theme between them all is the unconventional play and the hydraulic fracturing. You know, we looked at our investment in LNG as a way to participate further downstream in the value chain. And, we're putting in a facility, 150,000 gallons a day, which is expandable to 300,000 gallons a day. It's a modular built facility, so it's not one of these large stick-built facilities that you talk about for export. It's about a $100 million investment as opposed to the $1 billion investment. But it gets the product out there. And the key is, I think you can see what clean energy has done when they're talking about using LNG as a substitute for transportation fuel. The key there is that whole chicken and the egg, and I think that's been out there quite some time. When we first looked at this market, we thought, that the transportation sector looks like it's going to be a huge sector to go after, but each vehicle drinks just a small amount of fuel. So we started looking around, and actually we're up in Oklahoma City talking with Aubrey and his team, and they said, we're going to use LNG in our drilling operations. And I was sitting with Mr. Yates, and we both kind of looked at each other and felt a little sheepish about it because we're in the energy sector and we didn't even think to do that. So really what we're doing is we're betting on a basin. We're betting on the Eagle Ford Basin, the Permian Basin. We're going to put in an LNG facility. Essentially, I think you guys are familiar with LNG. We're just taking it at minus 260. We'll put it in tanks. It'll be distributed via a virtual pipeline. And then the drilling rigs and the frac units are going to use that. And the key there is that those are heavy users as far as consumption. So a drilling rig can drink up to 3,000 gallons of LNG on a daily basis, displacing up to 70% of diesel. A frac unit can drink up to 10,000 gallons of LNG on a daily basis, displacing up to 70%. And as opposed to the transportation sector, where you have to buy brand new LNG fueled vehicle and pay a premium for it, there is an invention called the dual fuel conversion kit, which enables these operators to take existing equipment, an existing diesel engine, and convert it over into a dual fuel unit at a fraction of the cost. And in some cases, they can do this in the field. And the big key for these guys has just been, do we have the fuel? Do we have the security with respect to supply of fuel to be able to operate this? Because you don't want to incur the cost and not be able to reap the savings. And you're looking at, up to 30% savings on fuel costs there. And in some cases, when you start looking at some of the drier portions of the Eagle Ford, that can make a difference, right? At the same time, we're building a market for natural gas, which ultimately, when you think the infrastructure that we're putting in place, you're going to start to see the transportation sector, the chicken and the egg will get solved there, and I think you're starting to see that now with UPS coming out with what they're doing. You figure FedEx is going to follow. Lowe's is coming out, and they're converting their fleet, so you figure Home Depot is going to follow. So that'll start to build, but this initial investment from the energy industry will really build that out, build that market for natural gas. And then of course, when the larger export projects do come online, that'll be helpful as well. But we look at this as a way. It takes a lot of energy to find and extract energy, yeah. And why don't we use our own?
So we're going to use energy to make energy, which actually we've been doing for a long time. But let me ask you a technical question. Mm-hmm. I'm an economist. I don't know how this stuff really works. But you take your LNG to a pad site. Mm-hmm. What type of investment has to be made at the pad for regasification? That's
a great question. So if you think about it, it's a carbon-based fuel, but because it's cryogenic, you've got to replace the entire supply chain, right? So you've got to have essentially a thermos bottle on its side to be able to transport the LNG to the site. And on site, the engine doesn't really know that it started out as LNG. It could be field gas, it could be pipeline gas. So you have to regas. So you've got about a $500,000 to a $750,000 investment, depending on the flow rate that you need, in order to regasify and put the fuel to the site. Conversion kits on a drilling rig are coming down, so you can get that done for anywhere from $300,000 to $500,000. And as I said, you can do that over a weekend to convert. And then on a frac spread, it's a little more involved just because of the number of pumps that are there, but about the same cost per pump.
Are you going to help finance that, or is that going to be the responsibility of the rig operator?
Well, it's a great question. If you look at what's out there right now, conversions are happening, and most of the rig operators and even the frac operators are buying dual fuel OEM from the start. Yeah. So it's less and less of an issue of conversion, and it's more and more of, and they're going dual fuel, so they have the flexibility because there isn't enough supply out there. So they want to be able to use these fleets in areas where they can still get the return. And if they go into a basin that doesn't have LNG, they can still run diesel. So the conversion's less and less of a factor. What we have found, if you look down in South Texas right now, Boone has his plant in Willis. It's primarily through clean energy. It's primarily dedicated to the transportation sector. Most of the LNG that people are at least testing down in the Eagle Ford is coming from as far away as Tennessee, sometimes Alabama, which is not an efficient supply chain. So that's why we're putting our plant down there. And again, it's a bet on a basin. We believe, as I think most people in this room believe, the Eagle Ford is going to have long, long legs. And you know, the amount of energy that we're putting down in there in terms of the amount of production we're going to have is just a drop in the bucket relative to the amount of consumption down there. So it's a relatively safe investment on what we think is a great industry.
Keeping on the gas theme, let me ask Brad ERICKSTAD a question. Brad is the manager of business development at ATMOS Pipeline. He's been in the transportation development business, 24 years with ATMOS Pipeline. It probably even wasn't called ATMOS when you got started.
No, actually, it's
2 or 3 names ago?
2 or 3 names.
Yeah.
It's actually a Lone Star Gas Company. Started back, I think, in 1909. It's an old company. Lone Star was purchased, as some of y'all might remember, TXU Gas back in 1997. And TXU Gas owned us for about 7 years. Put it up for sale in 2004. ATMOS, a locally placed utility. They were located in Dallas, although they owned stuff and owned assets, I believe, in 11 states or 12 states at that time. They came in and they bought up the old Lone Star gas assets, the Lone Star pipeline assets from TXU, and they integrated that into their organization. And so they're starting with not only a footprint that they had in the Panhandle, but this 6,000 plus mile pipeline footprint all the way from west of the Permian in Waha to East Texas near Carthage, southeast down to Katy, some fairly large diameter pipelines. And for years and years, that pipeline operated as a way to bring gas into the market centers of Dallas, Fort Worth, Abilene, growing market, I guess, in Austin. And it wasn't really until about 20 years ago the company started looking at, well, what other things can we do with this pipeline asset other than bring gas into Dallas? And we began to build some short pieces of pipe to connect up larger pieces of pipe and created a conduit of a 36-inch pipe down through a 30-inch pipe from Waha down to Katy, and began to do through system transport, getting the gas, cheap gas out west, moving it down to the southeast and into the markets down at Katy. Chemicals and refinery, other types of entities that need the gas down there. And that was really the beginning. You go back about 1993, 94, that's what we were doing.
Weren't you also involved in kind of the first deliveries of commercial gas from the Barnett?
Yeah, I'm about to get to that.
Oh.
We're going to get to that. Yes, sir. Our pipeline goes right through the Permian. It goes right through the heart of what everyone's talking about as far as all the Permian shales. And we have some larger pipelines in the Barnett, but they were relatively small. And when we were first approached by Mitchell Energy back, I'd say in 1997, they said, we think we have something here in the Barnett, and we'd like to put in what seemed like just a massive interconnect for a field, all of 20 million a day. And so we kind of like, well, you guys are paying for this, because we weren't too sure we believed in it. Well, within a year, 18 months, we had expanded that 20 million a day station up to 120 million a day station, added several other measuring stations, and before you knew it, everybody had jumped on the bandwagon. And we were completely inundated by phone calls, which leads me to the point, if you're a producer or you're a midstream company, who do you call at ATMOS? I'm the guy. I'm the guy that picks up the phone. I'm the guy that has to tell somebody, where did you drill that? I'm sorry, there's not a ATMOS pipeline within 20 miles of where you're at. And hopefully there's another pipeline. I'll try to help them, but I'm the guy that has to explain to them that we have gas quality standards. We want to have, to maintain a safe and reliable system, we have to have gas that's pipeline quality. We have certain monitoring equipment that tends to be pretty expensive. And so the cost of interconnecting into a utility like ATMOS tends to be a lot higher than hooking into, say, a midstream company. So we take those as we can. The other ones we hand off to some of our brethren upstream to handle that. But what's happened recently in the last 2 or 3 years as the Permian has continued to escalate is we've had multiple companies approach us about bringing gas into our 36-inch pipeline out in the Midland, Odessa area that I guess probably spread over about 4 or 5 counties for us to bring a lot of gas into a pipeline that you would really is really not that full right now. But we're anticipating going from a pipeline that's maybe receiving a few 100 million a day to maybe being sort of full in the next 4 or 5 years. And where's that gas going to go? Most of it's going to go out west. It's going to go out to Waha. Most of it's not going to go to the east because we're still receiving an enormous amount of Barnett shale gas into our system, into our infrastructure that's currently serving the residents, the customers in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. So as we hook in the Permian gas into our pipeline and the really cold winter days, some of that gas may make it as far east over to Dallas, but the majority of that's going out west. It's going into the market pipelines, the interstates and the intrastates, and may end up in some of the LNG exporting facilities. So.
Yeah. Well, let me ask you about that, not just specific to your company, but in general, if we're going to become, over the next decade, a major LNG exporter, what types of pipeline investments are going to be required, not just in Texas, but around the country?
I would say for LNG, we'll start with Texas. Obviously, there's going to have to be some fairly large diameter pipes being built down to the Gulf Coast. I mean, we've got one big pipeline, it's a 30-inch, and we might be able to move, on a really good day, 450 million a day. That's a lot of gas. But there's a lot of industries that use that gas. And so if you're talking about bringing gas over and above what the industries along the Gulf Coast are using, you're talking about building very long, 200-300 mile long pipelines. If you're trying to go in the Barnett or out in the Permian to try to bring in additional gas into those LNG facilities along the Gulf Coast, pipelines are not cheap. To build a large diameter pipeline, a 36-inch or a 42-inch pipeline, you're talking about spending $2 million a mile, $3 million a mile, just depending on where you're going through and what the cost of steel is at any given time. So if you wanted to build, say, a 200-mile long pipeline, you're going to spend $500 million on just a 36-inch pipeline to perhaps move half a BCF or more gas down to the Gulf Coast or West Coast or East Coast. They're not cheap projects. I'll conclude my statement here. A friend of mine once said, and as I get older, the beauty of this statement never ceases to amaze me. There's only 2 types of pipelines. There's pipelines that are too big, and there's pipelines that are too small. And in general, you don't want to be the guy that builds the pipeline that's too big. It's just an enormous amount of money, and it sits there, and it's half empty, and it's just sort of embarrassing. But then again, when you build the pipeline that's too small, everybody says, what were you thinking? Couldn't you see this coming? So hopefully we are on the side of caution as we move forward. What we're doing right now in the Permian is we're actually adding compression to allow us to pull gas out of the Permian, push it into those market pipelines out in the Waha area. And we just ordered our I guess it was about 4,500 horsepower of compression a couple weeks ago. So we are doing that right now.
You know, we've heard from earlier speakers that this newfound abundance of hydrocarbons has had tremendous economic benefits, not just in the energy-producing states, but for the entire U.S. It's helping to revive our manufacturing. It's holding down power generation costs, home heating costs all over the country. And I gave a talk in Stamford, Connecticut yesterday. Connecticut is considering a ban on hydraulic fracturing. I don't believe there's any oil and gas in the state of Connecticut, but it looks like they're going to follow the example of Vermont, which also has no oil and gas, but has a ban on fracking. New York State has a moratorium, which is a de facto ban. But one of the questions I was asked was, well, yeah, it's great, you're having a boom in Texas, but what does it all mean for us in Connecticut? And I tried to explain to them, how the entire U.S. economy is benefiting. Not just people who live in Connecticut and own shares in oil and gas companies, but I'm sure some of the insurance companies in Connecticut are benefiting from the oil and gas boom, and consulting firms. Everybody, you see the figure that API says something like 9.5 million jobs are supported by the oil and gas industry. And that's true. If you look at direct employment in oil and gas extraction, that's a fairly small number. That's a couple 100,000. But the linkages and the multiplier effects that spread over the entire country and benefit companies like BYRON's company.
Yes.
So BYRON is currently operating a service company. So why don't you tell us a bit about how your company is benefiting from the current energy boom?
Well, first of all, just a little introduction. I spent all my career in the tubular business, the pipe business, 32 years with a company here in Dallas called Lone Star Steel Company. The last 10 years as CEO, and we sold it to U.S. Steel about 6 years ago. Which was a wonderful day in our lives. But going back to the impact of that, the reason we were able to sell that company, being as stressed as we were through the cycles of my career, is because we were on a run. And we were on a run because of the Barnett was coming into play. 06, 05, 6, 7 were really great years for us relative to the past. Drilling rigs were going to work. Dry gas was very popular. The Haynesville, Eagle Ford, those even the Permian Basin was not really that active. So we had a monetization event, they call it, and it worked out really well. I started this company, Tubular Synergy Group, with my previous senior management team from Lone Star that didn't want to move to Pittsburgh, but so it worked out for us well. But the punchline is this: technology, and Kent mentioned this, technology driven from the engineering schools and just the service and supply sector has really driven this business. And I'm a tremendous and very blessed beneficiary of that. Because the Barnett, well, that's all Alan Custer. When his family started drilling that stuff up there in Montague County and others, they were drilling vertical wells, and they were having a tough time figuring out how to complete it. Well, and then Mitchell came in and all that jazz. But the story is that now that they've gone horizontal, guess what? They're consuming a lot more pipe. The drilling rigs are much more efficient now because Dee said it. About the expense of a unconventional play. You've got to be really competitive. So they've gone to pad drilling. They've gone to, to walking rigs, and they can cycle from spud to out to the toe. They're doing them in single-digit days in most basins now. That was unheard of. In 06, 30, 45 days was really, a victory lap. So the punchline for me is 1981. Some of you may be old enough to remember that. And if you were drilling well in 1981, you had a problem because there wasn't enough pipe. There was a pipe shortage all around the country, and two things happened. Amoco bought most of it because they had 250 rigs running, and so they kind of hoarded it, and the prices of pipe went through the roof. The horizontal drilling has had that sort of similar impact. The domestic industry can only produce about 3 million tons. The domestic industry today consumes about 6.5 million tons. There's a gap. In 1981, there was 4,500 rigs or something like that drilling. They consumed they would consume 100 tons. Actually, it was 108 by our calculation, but let's say 100 tons per rig per month. Tons are what pipe guys think about. That's what rings our bell. So 100 tons per rig per month. Last year we calculated, 2013, it's running about 330 tons per rig per month. So you think about that. So that's sort of equivalent of a 5,400 rig count, all-time high, best pipe market that any of the domestic producers have seen, certainly in my career. And so we love the ride. We're having, therefore, to source material for our customers to do two things: ensure value, because if you're in the resource play, you got to do it as efficiently as you possibly can, and to ensure quality enough to get through a multi-stage frac. It used to be 4, 5, 8, 10 stages. Now it's 20, 30. It's massive amounts of frac. So that's caused us to go to international sources, kind of connecting the Texas wellhead to the theme of this panel to the rest of the world. So we source material from Asia, and the newest pipe mill, seamless pipe mill in the world, happens to be in Saudi Arabia. Can you believe they've never had a pipe mill in their country? And they just built one because they were a little concerned about the availability on a global scale to meet their quality standards. So Aramco is kind of like Bluebell. They eat all they can, and then they sell the rest. And we're the beneficiary of that strategy. So we source material from Saudi Arabia, from India, up and up down the Pacific Rim. And our latest deal, which is kind of cool, connecting a near neighbor, Mexico. One of our new exclusive relationships is with a Monterrey, Mexico-based company, Prolamsa. They're one of the largest industrial companies in Mexico, and they came to us and wanted us to help them build a market in Texas to represent OCTG and line pipe. And I tell you, we kind of discouraged them from doing that, but they were kind of hell-bent to make the investment, their new capital investments, because it's a family-held, fourth-generation privately held company. They wanted to make the investment on this side of the river. So that's what they're doing. So they have broken ground. They're in Bryan College Station. They're putting in a massive OCTG casing, tubing, and line pipe manufacturing facility in Bryan, Texas. It's been nearly $300 million. It's going to be the largest employer in Brazos County other than the university. 250 jobs for the great state. And they're going to be operating late this year. So just all kinds of cool things are going on relative to the service sector brought to us by the Lord, number one. Number two, of our good customers that are fracking those hydrocarbons that were left behind. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
By the way, I didn't read the full resumes of any of our speakers. Byron's a very distinguished person, and he serves on the boards of several companies. In addition to his own, he's on the board of Quicksilver Resources and Enerflex, which is a publicly traded Calgary-based supplier of natural gas compression and oil and gas processing equipment. Ken, let me go back to you and take off your educator hat for a minute and remember when you were a legislator and a regulator. So what's your take on the state of regulatory oversight of the oil and gas industry today, both at the state level and the federal level? Do you think it's just about right? Are you concerned about these growing federal incursions, or at least attempts by federal agencies to get more involved in regulating oil and gas production? Do you have any thoughts about that?
I think the Railroad Commission does a pretty good job. I think we did back then, and that we work with industry to try to produce product and products for the state of Texas that help the consumer, help the average citizen, and they help an industry that pays a lot of taxes. And so I think that works fairly well. There's always going to be some ups and downs on some issues. But I think at the federal level, it's just gotten worse and worse. We had problems with a lot of the federal agencies when I was chairman of the Railroad Commission. But you look at what has happened since then, and the distance between the people that are operating and the people that are making the decision within a bureaucracy, the further the distance, the worse the decisions. And those decisions have been stretched out enormously over the last 20 years. but especially in the last 8 years, I think it's a philosophical thing, and staying away from politics, but I mean, you look at who got elected, and they have a different philosophy, and their philosophy is not growth. And so they want to study every issue to death. And that's when you have tremendous problems. But I think that you look, and I've said and talked about it earlier, the greatest enemy that poor people have are bureaucracies. And they're there to protect them. You know, they're there to help them, and they don't. They create more problems. And I don't know that someone's going to change that. I was in Congress when Ronald Reagan was there. He tried, he made some movement, but it has grown. You go back and look at any agency, and there's been tremendous growth. And I'm telling you all this, despite that, industry has made adjustments. And they've made adjustments. They may not like it, but they've made those adjustments so they can still produce the product that is demanded by the people throughout the world. This country was built on cheap energy. You look at what happened, and that changed over the last 20 years, and especially the last 10. But we've still made adjustments. Part of the adjustments, the consumer is more apt to watch what they consume. If gasoline was 39 cents a gallon, you know, well, I mean, that'd be something else. But there's nothing that will cure high prices of gasoline faster than high prices. And that's something that the industries have made adjustments to. And I'm not optimistic that bureaucracies are going to get better.
Well, it is pretty amazing if you consider that the shale revolution has occurred probably more despite of than because of support.
You look at New York putting a moratorium, and I can guarantee it's not based on science. And that's the reason we started this frac group, to look at what is happening and make decisions based on science. And industry, if they are on the wrong side on something, they can make those adjustments and make those adjustments quickly.
It seems to me the only time the public is focused on energy, or for that matter, politicians are focused on energy, is when gasoline goes over $4 a gallon.
Same thing on drought. They're not concerned about water, and then when you say, well, you can't water your lawn but once every 3 years, you know, it gets their attention. They understand that,
Right.
And that it makes it difficult.
But on that, I just would add, you know, the thing that relative to what Texas can do, and what Kent says, I think the Texas Railroad Commission, you know, they're kind of the poster child for interfacing with the industry. They've done a good job. Industry, you know, has a good relationship. And I think our responsibility as Texans in the oil and gas business is to do what we do well and be the poster child. And so New York doesn't have a, you know, anxiety attack about, you know, fracking and pipelines and water consumption. We just need to be very proactive, and several guys on the panel earlier addressed that. We just do what we do well, and we've got a pretty good track record. And if you do that well, it gets exported to other states and other regions and other basins, and it has. I mean, look at the Bakken. Look at there's other places that.
No, it's you know, the southern tier of New York State's got tremendous potential, particularly for dry gas. And they also have the Millennium Pipeline that goes right across into the New York City Gateway. And this is against the backdrop of a governor who not only can't make up its mind about fracking, but wants to close Indian Point nuclear plant, which provides 25% of the electricity to New York City. I mean, it's just an incredible conundrum, and you just got to wonder, you know, what is the political economy like in that state where they can't seem to make good decisions.
But if you're sloppy, they'll come after you. I mean, look at the coal industry. They have some of that coal ash getting into the river.
Right.
Coal's in trouble. CO2, coal's in trouble. So if you don't do your job well, and you're not a poster child in leadership, you know, you kind of deserve what you get.
Can I play devil's advocate for a minute?
Please.
Because, you know, every president since Nixon, to the extent they've had an energy policy, well, we did have an energy policy during the Carter administration.
Yeah, wear a sweater.
Well,
That was his policy.
No, I remember. I was working in Washington at the time, and Carter's energy plan. There were 5 different bills in retrospect referred to as a travesty and 5X. But you see, the problem back then, it was based on the notion of scarcity. We thought we were running out of this stuff,
Right.
so we had to hoard it, and we weren't going to waste gas to generate electricity. That was great for the coal industry. They loved it. But this is the point I wanted to make. So every president since Nixon has talked about energy independence, weaning ourselves off of imported oil, particularly weaning ourselves off of OPEC oil. We've actually at this conference heard several speakers talk about the potential for American energy independence or North American energy independence. I see that as political jargon. As an economist, that doesn't mean anything. It seems to me that a sensible energy policy would be one in which we engage with the world. We are, after all, the #1 gas producer, the #2 or #3 oil producer, soon to become #1. We're #1 in nuclear. We're #1 in renewables. We're #2 in coal. That we should be engaging in the global marketplace. And let's say, and we heard Ken Medlock was talking about this, if it makes economic and logistical sense to export some light crude, we should do so. And if it makes economic and logistical sense to import heavy crude, we should do so. So, I mean, this energy independence to me is just it's political jargon. It's a throwaway. And what's your reaction to it?
Well, there are certain things that happen in campaigns, and I can look back on them now, and I kind of chuck to get elected. And I asked one time, he had an ad that I had seen, and I said, well, he said, all hell is just to win. Sometimes when you win, you also need to serve. And that energy independence really comes back to making energy decisions that do affect the world, because we live in a world economy, whether we like it or not. And you live in a world economy, and if it makes more sense to take some oil from Alaska to Japan and bring some heavy oil from Venezuela, you do what makes economic sense, and that's what you do. But if you have someone in politics run a TV ad against some candidate that let that happen, it makes it very difficult, because a 30-second spot, it's easily inflamed the voter if you say, they're taking our oil and sending it to Japan. Are you for that? No. No. Ethel, are you for that? No, hell no. And so, I mean, that's one of the things that you have to be careful. Politics was better before television. And I'll tell you why.
And the internet.
The candidates had to go around and speak at courthouse squares, and they had to give a lengthy speech. They had to meet the people. And now you got a 30-second soundbite. And I've always said, and Dick Morris, the political consultant, says, if you can't say it in 30 seconds or less, it's not an issue. One quick story. Someone told me that oil field utilization was going to be a big issue when I ran for state senate in 1974. Boy, I just worked on it, and I had the information. I went to Seminole, Texas, in the oil patch. I spoke to the Lions Club, and I was going to talk about oil field utilization, and I just thought, I'll wait and they'll ask, and I'll show them how smart I am. And so I took questions. First question, how do you stand on gun control? And then next question.
Yeah.
Finally, I'd spent all that time on oil field utilization. I said, does anyone want to know how I stand on oil field utilization? It looked like a bunch of owls in a tree. They just blinked. They didn't care.
Yeah.
So it wasn't an issue. Might have been an issue to the majors and the independents, but it wasn't an issue to the general.
Well, to the point I was making, energy is generally not on anybody's radar screen or front burner, except when we have those periodic spikes in gasoline prices. And then we hear a lot of nonsensical stuff. Remember during the 2012 presidential campaign, oil prices spiked. I think it was in the late spring. So for about 20 minutes, the candidates were talking about energy. But frankly, they were both spouting nonsense. Any other?
I was just going to say on energy independence.
Yeah.
I'm very proud of the industry that I serve. I think, you know, from whatever sector you're from in the audience, you're from the financial services or oil field services, or you're an operator, or you're a pipeline guy, I think we've really stepped up to the challenge of energy independence. And to me, what that means, Bud, I'm not sure what it means, but to me it means we're energy independent as a nation when we don't have to send our troops to spill their blood on foreign soil to protect our supply of energy. And I think we're leaning into it, and I'm really proud of what we're doing, because we are less dependent today on that issue than we were in 2006 before the Barnett really got going. So I think we've done a great job.
What it's really given us is leverage, right?
Right.
It's given us leverage to arbitrage prices. It's given us leverage for our industries that use energy, which name an industry out there that doesn't use energy, to be put itself on a competitive foot with everyone else.
But it's also giving us political leverage, wouldn't you?
And it has, right? But even I mean, you look at, in the past life, I used to work in turnarounds and restructuring, so bankruptcy, and I did the LyondellBasell bankruptcy when they went through. And, you know, we did the long-range plan for them, looked at a bunch of different economic scenarios, had CIRA involved, and, you know, we're a bit uncertain about how they were going to survive that, and we're looking to the Middle East refineries and chemical plants and thought that they were going to dominate the world. Well, look where we are today. I mean, LyondellBasell's killing it. The chemical industry doesn't want to export in natural gas. So, you know, it's given all our industries, it's the rising tide that's lifted us up. So it's the leverage that's given us to be able to compete. So if we trade some energy here or there to take advantage of that, right? To take advantage of it. If they need something that we have, we need something that they have, and they need it more, well, that's leverage. Let's use that to our benefit for the rest of the country.
Final thought, if you think back to the 70s when actually people couldn't get gasoline, and we priced it at 75 cents, $1, $1.20. How many of y'all had to stand in line and wait for an hour to get gasoline the last 20 or 30 years? It just hadn't happened. It's nice to have a sufficiency of gas and oil here in the United States, or ability to import oil to meet those needs. I think the interesting thing is worldwide, with the shales, I think it's going to enhance the diversity of where we can get oil from, where we can get gas from. And that's going to, I think that lends itself to calling us kind of independent. We don't have to depend on any one country or any one area of the world. We can do business with anybody that we want to in the world and buy at the best price or at the best location for delivery.
I don't know how many of you saw it, but a couple of weeks ago, The Economist had a cover story. It's called America, the Petro State. And there was a picture of Obama in a white robe like a Saudi. And actually, it's a very, very good article. And in that article, there was a map of it showed all the major oil-producing countries, you know, and on one side, it was their production, and on the other side was their exports. So everybody else is exporting a fair amount of their production, and, you know, we're number 2 or 3, and it's just a tiny little circle representing what we currently export. We have a couple of minutes left, and I'd like to do what Kathy did in the last session and open the floor to our participants. Victor?
Trouble.
I'm against it. I've always been against it. And let me tell one funny story. When I was running for Congress, there were 5 of us running. Somebody asked that, and the guy said, "I'm against it." And the next guy said, "I'm really against it." And the next guy said, I'm going to introduce a bill. This is a true story. I'm going to introduce a bill to make it a crime to introduce a bill for gun control. Well, they finally get down to me. I mean, it's getting tougher. And I said, not only am I against it, but if they ever try to get your guns, I'll give you my home phone number and I'll come over and help you keep them. You know, I mean, so I know the issue on that in West Texas, and it didn't take me long to figure that one out.
There's some up here.
Yes, our friend from China. Is there a microphone?
Yeah, it's coming.
Here it comes.
My name is Derong Cao. I'm now working as a commercial counselor at the Consulate General of China in Houston. And thank you, Madam Josephine and Mr. Jensen. And I'm very, I and my colleague, Mr. Wei, are very honored to be here attending Texas Energy Council Symposium. And recently, a few Chinese companies come to me, ask for my opinion about export LNG from the Gulf Coast area to China. So my question is, how do you think about the possibility about exporting the LNG from the United States to China? Thank you.
I'll take that. We do, like I said earlier, we do have a pipeline that extends from the Dallas area down to the Katy area. We don't get all the way to the coast, but there's a lot of other pipelines down there that can take it the final few miles. We've pretty much been able to satisfy the needs of the Dallas-Fort Worth area for the most part with just the Barnett Shale. It's a huge resource that was non-existent 15 years ago. It's an amazing thing, because I think by this time, if we had not had the Barnett, we would have probably built another pipeline, a looping pipeline down to Katy or out to Waha. It would cost an enormous amount of money. Now we have lots of gas. The idea of transporting more Barnett or Permian gas down to the coast, we're really interested in entertaining that. It's an expensive project. We've already maxed out pretty much what we can do with the pipeline we have and the compression that we have. And once you've put in all the compression that you can put in on a pipe, you got to put in another pipe. I'll give you just kind of an idea. To build a new pipe from, say, Dallas out to Waha to move 200 million a day, I'm sure it'd be well over $500 million, maybe close to $1 billion. To move that much incrementally by putting in a little bit more compression out there, we may spend $40 million total. So you try to use the existing footprint, add compression to that until you maximize it, and then at that point, it starts getting real expensive. And then people have to really start counting the cost of what it takes to get that gas to the coast to be liquefied and then shipped. But, you know, people need the gas, and it's certainly something that's within the realm of possibility.
Well, it would seem to me that China would be a logical market for U.S. gas and Gulf Coast delivered gas in particular. We have the widening of the Panama Canal that'll make it possible for those giant LNG tankers to take a shortcut. But it's my understanding that unless you have a free trade agreement or most favored nation status, you have to get special dispensation to export to, say, China, with which we do not have a free trade agreement, and we do not have most favored nation status. So there are some legal.
I would say that most of the if you just made me call it in the air, heads or tails, I'd say most of the Chinese LNG will come from the West Coast. And we heard from the British Columbia, most of it's going to come from British Columbia because it's just economic to do that. There's a lot of gas in Canada, and it's going to be real tough to site an export terminal on our West Coast. So I just have a vision of LNG terminals stacked up on the BC coast, look like Starbucks in Dallas. I mean, it's just going to be all the way up.
But isn't it true that the two export facilities currently under construction have long-term supply agreements with utilities in Japan and Korea?
And that's the thing, and I think that was the nature of Mr. Cho's question, is that, you know, how do you, if they want to pair up, is it a good opportunity to pair up with a Gulf Coast exporter or someplace else? There's plenty of gas, Mr. Cho, in the United States for China to import.
There was a question. Somebody had their hand up.
Thank you. Just actually to kind of dovetail after our friends from China's comments about LNG exports, I was actually thinking the opposite direction, to the east. Given recent events politically with Putin and Russia and Ukraine, doesn't LNG exporting, if we were to get that far along, offer a huge opportunity to exercise leverage and avoid deploying any type of manpower personnel by purely offering Europe an alternate source for their power needs?
Absolutely it does. You take, and Lithuania is a small country, but I mean, they got one pipeline, and that's from Russia. But it's funny to me that some of the people that are calling for most that we've got to do something on the energy are the very people that have stalled on energy, domestically and foreign, in the past. And everyone, when there's a problem, they want that solution right then. And that's just part of the American society. On the last question, one other thing I would mention, it may have been mentioned earlier today, but if you look at what happened to the nuclear power plants in Japan and everything, there's such a demand for LNG there that it's very big.
Yeah, they're paying $21.
Yeah. You know, in oil, you have a market, you have a worldwide market on what people think the last barrel of oil is going to cost, but in natural gas, it's just there's regional markets, and is $21. You know, that's.
In my view, the capital cost for an LNG terminal is huge. It's not like you build it and they will come. You don't do that. It's not like at 7-Eleven, just drop it in and see who shows up. Generally, those things are justified with offtakes. And so they get firm offtakes. So the guy that builds it gets it permitted. They get you know, the offtakes committed, so it's used up. And so it does give us leverage because we have the ability, and maybe somebody take Japan or somebody that wants to has the offtake, they could sell it on the sea. I mean, you know, they could. It could be an alternative source, but it's in theory, I think. I like the leverage thought, but most of that, it's real expensive to build an LNG terminal.
We are more or less out of time. Do any of the panelists have a closing comment or thought they want to add?
Thank you.
Oh, no, this has been very entertaining and insightful, and let's give a round of applause to all of our panelists.